In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a woodworking MOXON vise.
Working on zombie apocalypse.
Let's have a look at the material you're going to need to make this MOXON vise. I've got two pieces of wood, doesn't matter the width entirely, they're more or less 630 millimeters long. These are going to be the jaws of the MOXON vise. I've got another smaller piece here which is going to be my support structure. It's also 630 millimeters long, it's going to be attached like this. I've also got three 45-degree angles with a 90-degree on one end. These are going to be my structural supports at the bottom. I am also going to need two sizes of hole saw, one smaller than the other. These are going to be to make the knobs in which to tighten the vise with. I am going to need a 22 millimeter spade bit. This is to make countersink holes into the wood. I'm going to need two more pieces of wood. These are going to be used to make the knobs as well for the vise. I'm going to need a couple of T-nuts. This is a size M8. I'm going to need a couple of M8 size nuts or 12 millimeter nuts. I'm going to need a threaded rod, also M8 or 12 millimeters, and a drill machine to drill the holes with. I'm also going to use a 1/4 inch roundover bit in the router in order to round off the edges of the knobs for the vise that I'm going to make. So let's put all these aside and start making the knobs and putting the vise together. The first piece that I'm going to drill with the smaller hole saw are the two round pieces of wood that's going to go behind the main knob, or the main two knobs of the MOXON vise. So let me start drilling these two holes. Okay, with the two smaller pieces cut, these are the pieces we're going to use. They're going to be behind the main knob, which is going to be on front, and the main knob is also going to be bigger. So these are cut, we're going to put them aside for now. Now before we cut the entire main knob, I'm only going to use the bigger hole saw just to make two inserts into the piece of wood that we're going to make the knobs of, and I'll show you why after it's done. Okay, so like you can see, before I drilled the main knobs with the big hole saw, I first drilled the smaller holes with the 22 millimeter spade bit, and thereafter I completely drilled out the two pieces of knob. So once I've got the two smaller pieces and the two big pieces, I'm firstly going to round over the edges of the main knobs with the 1/4 inch roundover bit. And these then thereafter will be attached like this to the smaller pieces, and in between we are going to insert a T-nut where the threaded rod will be attached to. So for now, let's start by rounding over those two knobs. So now that the edges have been rounded over, it's much nicer to hold on to and to turn. It doesn't hurt your fingers, it doesn't have sharp edges where your fingers go, and it's got a good grip. Your hand won't slip on the knob or anything of the sort. So next we're going to be inserting the T-nuts. So let me set that up and we'll get right to it. So I've taken the 22mm spade bit. In the smaller piece of the wood, I've drilled a slight hole, only a shallow one, the thickness of the T-nut top edge, so that the T-nut can fit into the hole over there. So what I'm going to do now is I've already put some wood glue on here. So I've put a bolt through the main knob on the outside, and I'm going to be basically attaching these two to each other just so that the wood can set for the meanwhile. And then I'll be taking this bolt out when the wood has when the glue has dried, and I'm going to be inserting this main rod into each of them. So there's going to be 2 rods, 2 knobs for either side of the MOXON vise, and these will then be the knobs with which the vise is tightened and loosened. So let me finish the 2 knobs, where after I'll put in the rods, and then we'll start putting the vise together. Okay, so the pieces of wood, or the knobs with the other piece attached to it, the wood has started to dry. I've also, as a precaution, in both of the knobs just put a wooden screw with a countersink hole in each of them, just so that they would be held together very well, even with the glue and the screw together. So what I've done next is I'm taking some basically steel epoxy, and I'm going to be mixing this now. Mixing it well together, equal parts of both the resin and the hardener, so that it mixes very well. Now steel epoxy will get very hard, and it will keep the rods that I'm going to put inside of the knobs, it will keep them in place with the T-nut that is now inside there as well, between the 2 pieces of wood. So once the epoxy has been properly mixed, I'm going to take with a screw or a stick of some sort, take some of it and spread it on the inside of the hole, on the thread of the T-nut that's inside there. I'm just going to apply a fairly generous amount, and once the amount is in there, I'm going to take a rod. I've cut the threaded rod in a distance of 250mm. The reason for that length is where it's going to be inserted into the vise and below my bench. This is the distance where the frame of my bench is, so it can't go in further than this. So, and this is quite a good distance to clamp something with as well. So this should be more than sufficient. Okay, so this might turn in a bit tighter now with the epoxy in there as well. So let's get this done. I'm going to keep turning it until the epoxy starts surfacing at the other end. You'll see the epoxy is starting to show on this end. Just going to slightly level it with my fingers. Rub this on this little plank over here, the excess, and then maybe just lock it for the time being with a nut on the back side, just so that it stays in place. And then this we will leave to dry. Now for the next one, which is exactly the same procedure. So let's speed this up a bit. Well, while these two knobs with the rods and the epoxy inside are busy drying, I'm now going to start with the jaws of the vise itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start drilling some holes into the back side of the jaw, into where the support beam is going to be attached, like this. So let me get on to drilling those holes. Alright, now on the back side of the plank, or the inside, I'm going to drill bigger holes about halfway through the wood, and this hole would be the size of the head of the screw that I intend to use. So that when a screw is put in there into the other wood at the back, this would be countersunk into the piece of wood and would not be interfering with anything that you're clamping. And it will also allow for a deeper thread body to enter the wood at the back. So let me get drilling on those. Okay, so the next step, in order to mount the support piece of wood to the jaw of the vise, I'm going to take the support piece as well as my 45-degree angles. I'm going to space them like so and screw each of these to this one with 2 screws from the top at first. Once they are attached with the screws and some wood glue in between, I will then position it on the jaw at the bottom here and drill some pilot holes from the back side into this wood and put screws as well as wood glue between those as well. And thereafter, this piece should be done, and this can be mounted to the tabletop at the bottom. What I also did is the spacing that I've left here is exactly the thickness of the bench, so that this would be flush with the top, so that if I ever work on top, nothing would be bumping against the vise. It would be flush over. And if I clamp something in the vise, it would be easy to sand it or to work with it in any way that I need to. So let me get to the markings here, start drilling some holes and putting this together. Alright, so what I'm going to do now first is I'm going to drill 6 more holes, 2 for each of these supports, so that when I mount this at the back, I can put 2 screws per support from the back as well. And once again, I'm going to, on the back side, drill larger holes for the head of the screw so that it can be countersunk into the wood and will not interfere with anything else. Once that is done, I'm going to clamp this part like I said, and then put all the screws in at once. So this should be quite fun. So let me start drilling these holes. Okay, so I've drilled all the small little holes for the screws in the main drawer of the clamp. So now it's time to clamp this one onto the wood here, and then clamp it together and drill all the pilot holes from the bottom, as well as insert the screws and put on the glue. But before I'm going to do that, I'm first going to insert 2 T-nuts from this side into the main holes, where the main rods, which we are still waiting for the epoxy to dry, will be coming through from the other side. So we first need to put these 2 in and hammer them in so they're in place, and once they're in place, then we can continue putting this thing on. So let me quickly drill the holes for the 2 of these. What I've noticed is that while these T-nuts are not countersunk into this main piece of wood, they're going to catch the bottom of the support piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a chisel and just take pieces of the wood out of there so that it can make space for the T-nut tops. So let me get around to doing that quickly. Awesome, so now that the gaps have been taken out at the bottom and the T-nuts can fit in there pretty good and fairly well, what I'm going to do is put on some glue and then clamp it together so that we can start drilling pilot holes and also put in the screws. So let me put the glue on here. Like I've mentioned before, the gap on the top side here is exactly the thickness of the tabletop over here, so it would be a perfect flush fit at the bottom, or even maybe slightly below, just as long as it's not sticking past the tabletop here. So let me clamp this into place. Awesome, now that it's clamped into place, now I can start drilling the pilot holes on the back side. Wonderful, so all the holes have been drilled, all the screws have been inserted. So this is now basically ready to be mounted here. And this is where the home or the new position of the MOXON vise will be in the end. So while I start putting the rest of the vise together, I think we should first mount this to the table. I think that's probably the best idea. So I'm going to drill a couple of holes through the top here and drive holes into the table, clamp this to the bottom of the table, and then put the screws in from the bottom as well as some wood glue in between. So we're getting pretty close to the end now. I'm getting excited about this. Okay, so now it's time to mount this on the bottom of the table so that we can drill some pilot holes and also mount it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put glue on the top side here. Fairly generous amount because this is going to help a lot to hold this thing in place. And then we're going to start putting it in its place. More or less in the middle like this. And then clamp it on both sides. Awesome. Now that that's in place, I'm going to take the drill and I'm going to drill the pilot holes from the bottom into the tabletop so that I can thereafter insert the screws. Alright, so it's very steady, the hole that's attached to the table very steadily. So let's now go ahead and insert the face of the clamp with the two knobs that I've dried up until now and see how well this works. Let me put it together. Here are the two knobs and the epoxy have dried very well up to now. Just take these nuts off here. The glue as well in between is also dried very well. So while I'm taking these off, okay, so the two jaws of the vise is on, the two knobs with the threaded rod is inserted. So let's see what the clamping capabilities of this thing is. I'm going to put a piece of plank or wood in there. Going to clamp it tightly with the two knobs. The epoxy is pretty very well. This is very solid. The knobs are solid. The rod is properly connected and sealed with the knobs by now. So let's see. Wow. This is very nice. I'm impressed and I'm quite happy. This came out exactly as I planned and I envisioned, and I cannot believe how steady this is. This is working like a charm and I'm very happy with it. I can probably stain the handles a bit, make them a bit darker, make them look a bit nicer. But as far as effectiveness here, this is very solid. This is not going anywhere and I'm really happy with it. So, if you like this video, hit the subscribe button and the like button and let me know in the comments what other type of project you would like to see. Maybe I can get some ideas of what I can show you guys next. So, until next time, enjoy.